Hello, everyone, and welcome to another one of our fantastic sessions, How to Work Without Losing Your Mind. Loads of familiar faces here. For those that haven't met me before, my name is Nick. I am the founder and CEO of Co-Team, and I'm joined today by a very, very special guest, and we'll introduce her in just a moment. If you haven't done so already, we'd love you just to check in. Tell us how your Tuesday is going. You can scan that QR code on the screen there. You can click the link that I just shared in the chat. It's always good just to get a little bit of a temperature check before we launch into these things. I'm sure many of you hurriedly around, eating your lunch, just sort of tuning in, half in here, half maybe buried in email, but really want to know how your morning's going, or evening for me, as I am actually joining you all the way from Brisbane, Australia today, where it is very cold and rainy. And I keep hearing from my friends about the wonderful weather in London today, and I'm starting to feel very jealous. Normally it's the other way around. So checking in on our little poll here, we'll give that a second to update. Okay, few sassy people in the crowd, a little bit of panic screaming going on. No one's falling asleep or putting out any fire, so it's always a good place to be. We are going to be with you for the next half an hour or so. We have an amazing speaker, Cate. I'm going to let her introduce herself in a second. One of the key things with this session is that we want you to ask questions. I came across Cate at a conference I was at a few weeks ago in London, Retail Week Live. I saw her speak. I thought she was absolutely incredible. Like me, we both have a history with working at Google. So we connected over that. And her book is absolutely fantastic and amazing. So if you ask us a good question, we'll give you a copy of the book. That's the deal. So scan that QR code there, submit questions at any point. We'll pick them up at the end. Make sure you put your name on the bottom of the question so we know that it's you that asked it. And you will indeed walk away with a copy of Cate's book. But Cate, I think I've spoken enough. Over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I feel like we're radio hosts together, like giving away prizes. Call in.
Basically bribing people to ask good questions.
Exactly. Yeah. To be transparent, yes, 100%. That's what we're doing. Thank you so much for having me. Right, I will get right on it. So my name is Cate. I'm the editor-in-chief of HuffPost UK. I have a 2-year-old toddler, so I'm also a full-time working parent. And I'm also the author of this book that you're looking at now, How to Work Without Losing Your Mind, which is, conveniently also the subject matter of our talk today. So what I'm going to be sharing with you today is basically like my book summed up in 5 key points. I actually have a bit of a problem with a lot of business books that are out there. A lot of them are really focused on like tech bro hustle culture or wellness influencers who kind of have unrealistic mental health advice and basically tell you to go live in a van. So my book is full of simple ideas and a lot of stuff that's just common sense that already know. But these are the exact same things that kind of go out the window and that we tend to forget when we're struggling with our mental health or really stressed. So simple and easy are not necessarily always the same thing. To tell you a bit more about myself. So I'm Cate. You can tell from my accent that I am not from the UK. I've lived in the UK for about 17 years and I still sound like this. I grew up in California, just the suburbs, not a cool part, not LA or anything like that. And I moved here in 2006 after I met my husband on MySpace. That tells you how old I am. And when I was, living in California, I very much was an aspiring writer, and I was also an assistant store manager at Starbucks. So shout out to the other former baristas out there. When I moved here, I couldn't legally work. So because this was like 2006, I started a blog. It seemed to be the cool thing to do at the time. And thankfully, it led to getting my first proper writing job at the UK's first blog publishing company. I worked there briefly, and then I kind of started up my own online magazine for women, and I ran that for about 5 years. And then I joined MSN. And then they did a classic tech company restructure and I lost my job. But thankfully, BuzzFeed was hiring at the time. And I worked there for almost 3 really wonderful, hectic, chaotic 3 years. That was kind of at BuzzFeed's, I think, biggest growth period. And I learned a lot while I was there. And then I made a really weird decision to go and work for the ex-presenters of Top Gear, who are famously really easy to get along with and fun to work for. So I made a quick exit from that situation, and I was headhunted by Google, which was great for my ego. And it turned out not so great for my mental health, which I will come back to. But after quite an ordeal at Google, I then went on to have what I thought was like my dream job at the time. I was hired as editor-in-chief of The Pool, which was like an online women's magazine. It was co-founded by Lord Laverne, who you might know from the BBC or The One Show. And I loved it. And I was so excited to be there. And then about 4 months in, the guy who ran the business and owned the business at the time just like stopped paying people. And it was all over social media. It was all over the BBC. And I was just like, you know, and I'm done for a bit. So I decided to write a book, and I wanted to write a book that was for like your average person who was having a hard time at work. So crying in the work blues, or is burnt out and just really doesn't know what to do next. So this book is partly about my own personal experiences and the things that I've learned, but also it's also very much about other people's experiences, people who have dealt with, you know, terrible managers who've lost their jobs in quite spectacular ways, dealing with burnout, actual real work addiction, because that's a thing, and women who have dealt with fertility issues and miscarriages at work. And I spoke with therapists and HR managers and people that I know that are, you know, just actual really good, solid people managers, which I find are increasingly rare these days. So all of these people, plus my own experiences, have contributed to how to work without losing your mind. So if you want to go ahead and go to the first slide, please. So my first big pointer is to listen to your body, and therefore listening to your mind. So usually when you're stressed out, and you might not realize it, your body is probably actually screaming at you before like your kind of logical brain kind of goes, oh yeah, I'm extremely stressed. So when I mentioned that my mental health was not great when I was at Google, I was actually already in therapy at the time. So I knew I was stressed out by stuff, but I wasn't kind of fully understanding and appreciating just how much I was stressed out. I had an eye twitch that lasted for over 6 weeks. I was experiencing a lot of really interesting digestive issues. And I was also getting like these really weird, the only way I can describe it is like twinges, like in my chest and in my neck and in my upper back. So I went to the wellness nurse that was in the building at Google, because they don't want you to leave the building. And she was concerned and did a whole bunch of different tests. And once they kind of ruled out it being like anything heart related, she then was like, I think you need to see a physical therapist. So I walked down the hall, because there's also a physical therapist in the building. And he kind of took one look at me and was like, okay, well, you're not breathing properly, which was news to me, because I thought, as someone who had been breathing their entire life, I was quite good at it, but it turns out I was really bad at it. So he taught me how to breathe with your lungs and not just like up here in a really like short panicked way, which is how I was breathing, and hence the weird twinges and everything. But other than teaching me how to breathe, he actually had some really fantastic and useful information about stress, and the very kind of real serious health implications that can come from stress, and how that, like, just the connection between your body and mind just was something that like I knew, but I just wasn't fully appreciating or listening to. So essentially what I would say is, if you think that you might be stressed at work, you know, or you're getting some weird symptoms in your body, obviously, you know, go to your GP if you can get an appointment, and they can rule out anything more sinister going on. But I feel like so often these little things that keep happening, constant headaches, etc., is usually our body screaming at us that we are feeling quite stressed and not paying attention to that. So next slide, please.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that, Kate. that
Yes,
manifests itself in the most bizarre ways sometimes.
it really does, in some quite embarrassing ways sometimes too. Right. So having difficult conversations, and I've also put in there sweaty, awkward, awful, because that's what difficult conversations are. So often when I ask people, how are you? How's work going? I'll hear things like, oh, my manager is the worst. They keep asking me for all this last minute information, and I never have enough time to get back to him. So I'm always working late, trying to get him all the information that he needs. Or, Susie on my team is the worst. They've been here for 6 months, and yet they keep making these really ridiculous mistakes, and it takes me forever to fix them. My question is always, well, have you told them this? And the answer is usually something like, no, not really, but they should just know. I hear that a lot. They should just know. Or it's literally their job to do this, so I don't know why I should have to tell them to do this. So basically, no, they are not explicitly and directly giving them this feedback that, you keep giving me too much stuff to do and I don't have enough time, or, you keep making X, Y, and Z mistakes. They just kind of skirt around the issue and not giving them that feedback. So what I would say is that if you are not taking the time to have uncomfortable conversations with people, that you're doing yourself a disservice. If you're a people manager and you're avoiding having conversations with one of your direct reports because it might be awkward, you're actually negatively impacting that person's career and the performance of the overall business, which is usually the bottom line for all of us, right? So aside from those two things, you're also choosing to just kind of carry around this stress or this kind of hypothetical conversation. I don't know if you guys do that, if you're getting ready in the morning and having a conversation with somebody that that you need to talk to, but you've been putting it out. I don't know if that's, just me. I hope it's not just me. But when it comes to having these conversations, there's a lot of books on this subject alone. But my advice is pretty simple, actually. It's just, when you make the decision to finally have this conversation, go into it, giving the other person the benefit of the doubt. Choose to go into that meeting with as much empathy and kindness as you can. And you can be honest without being brutal. I'm sure some of us have been on the receiving end of more of a brutal than, honest conversation with empathy. And it's not a fun place to be in. You can bring in notes to this meeting if you want. I do that so often. I will write out a really difficult, awkward conversation and then do a shorter version, and then a shorter version, and then a shorter version, until I just kind of have one little page on a notebook. And I'll just acknowledge it hey, I have notes here just to make sure that I cover everything while we're having this conversation. I would say to not try to perform or act like an assertive person that you've seen in a film or Succession or something like that. It doesn't come across authentically. And I find it so much harder to act a certain way than to just kind of say what you need. So you can have these difficult conversations in your own way, in your own communication style, as long as you're being explicitly clear about what the problem is, getting, the answer to the question that you need, or, getting across the uncomfortable message that you've been avoiding. So you don't have to just act in a certain way. The shit sandwich is always a good method for this. So, hey, Susie, you've been here for 6 months now. You're doing fantastic at this, that, and the other. I have got some feedback that we keep making mistakes with this, that, and the other, but, no problem. We can work on this together. Do you have any questions? You're doing such a good job, though. Really looking forward to continue to work with you. Something like that. Also, that's kind of not always how these conversations go. I think it's so important to have them, but you also have to keep in mind that the kind of rosy, shiny example of how you think that might go, that they'll just go, yes, oh my gosh, you're so right. Thank you so much for that feedback. That doesn't always happen. So you kind of have to imagine, okay, well, what if they push back, or what if they're not happy with this, so that you can kind of anticipate the other options that might occur. But essentially, you're never going to get to the other side of that problem without going through this discomfort. And you also will not know kind of where you're at if they do have a negative response to that feedback. So until you essentially go and have that conversation, everything is just kind of an assumption, and you're choosing to kind of carry that around. So I would say, have the conversation, move through the discomfort, and then see where you're at.
And you're telling us the Logan Roy tell them to fuck off approach is not necessary for most.
It's always an option. It depends on what they've done.
One thing that I do actually that has helped me a lot in the past giving feedback to team members is the SBI model, for anyone that's come across that before, but it's trying to base feedback on actual data. So this is the situation, this was your behavior, this is the impact it had on me or the team, just to give more structured, constructive, good feedback. We can get into that some time.
No, but I mean, if you can tell someone to fuck off with empathy and kindness, I think that that's a real important leadership trait. Also an option.
This one, point 3, I remember you presenting this at the conference, and at first I was like, what? No, I don't agree with this at all. Because a lot of what we try to teach leaders at Co-Team is around vulnerability and bringing your full self to work.
Yeah.
Explain your perspective on this. I think it's an interesting one.
Yeah. And I think after the talk that you're thinking of, I saw quite a lot of discussion around this exact point on LinkedIn as well. So bottom line, I think that if you hear like in an orientation meeting, or if you're starting a new job, bring your whole self to work, whether it's a really, more traditional corporate environment or a super fun startup, I would just say that that's not an appropriate place to bring your whole self. Basically, I think even though they have the best of intentions, when companies say this, work environments and people managers are usually not equipped or know what to do with people's whole selves. And that's because people's whole selves include some seriously dark and complicated shit. So what they actually mean when they say that is be authentic, bring your values, be transparent about your family life. But, most workplaces can only cope with what I call like mental health light. So a touch of anxiety, getting signed off for depression, just the one time. Or, if you experience a bereavement, they can then send you flowers and then you come back after a week seemingly healed from your immense amount of grief. So they can only kind of deal with kind of like top level stuff, especially when it comes to mental health. And I think it's also really important to point out that if you are in a toxic working culture or an unsupportive working environment, this is not the place to bring your most like soft, vulnerable self, even if they are saying, oh, bring your whole self, bring your whole self. They don't know what to do with that, particularly in a toxic working environment. So I would say, be as honest as you can. Be you, as authentic as you can or feel safe to at work. But you need to set boundaries and what exactly your kind of whole authentic self at work that you bring is not going to look like how someone else does it. And it can also ebb and flow and change in a working environment, depending on management changes or just kind of how you feel or what's going on for you. But I think that you are absolutely doing your own mental health a huge favor by not just blindly bringing your whole self to work or a Zoom call for that matter. So like for me, when I joined HuffPost, I did so, it was like a year and a half ago almost. It was like January 2022. So we were still in that kind of weird, like kind of trying to emerge from lockdown and the pandemic, but not being quite there. So I had to start my new job remotely. And starting in a leadership position remotely is quite challenging, especially when a team has been together for quite a while and you're the new person. So I had to do like this awkward presentation of like, hello, I'm your new boss on a Zoom call. But I chose to share with them, like I've been on maternity leave. This is my first job since having my son. And, when I brought my son home from the hospital, 3 days later, my dad died. And so that was kind of the situation and the kind of place that I was at in my life. And I didn't share more information than that. I didn't give them a whole bunch of detail or like start crying on the call or anything like that. But I felt that it was important that they knew that, yes, I'm a new mom. And also I experienced this tough bereavement and a really strange situation with the pandemic and everything else. So, that was to give them an idea and a picture and a bit more context to who I was, especially at that moment in time, but to know what my boundaries were and to not cross them. So I think that's maybe a helpful example of how you can, especially in a leadership position, be authentic, but boundaried, and therefore not just letting your whole self hang out.
I think they're all very, very good points. Number 4.
Number 4. So always ask yourself, am I the asshole at work? Some of you will probably be familiar with that from Reddit. But I think, thinking about, am I the asshole at work is so important. So when I say that, what I mean is it's so easy to believe that like your manager is just a psychopath who is absolutely like out to get you, or that your one colleague in finance is just a maniac who absolutely hates your guts. But unfortunately, that isn't like the whole picture. And we have to acknowledge and accept, like I say, like what we're bringing to the party. What emotional baggage are we lugging with ourselves to work every day? If you do think that your boss absolutely hates you, maybe you're reading every email from them through that kind of filter. If you think, again, Susie, poor Susie, is just terrible at her job, then perhaps you're only ever seeing the mistakes that she makes rather than all the good and positive contributions that she makes to the team. If you're in a new job and you feel like completely out of your depth, you feel like you're not qualified for that job and everyone knows it and everyone's thinking that, you might be kind of reacting to things from a place of like defensiveness and not even realize it. So I think exploring about what you're kind of psychologically bringing to work every day and how that kind of colors the interactions that you have. So your emails, your Slack messages, your phone calls, I think that's really important to consider, because I hate this saying, like, there's 2 sides to every story, but, we have to consider what we bring to interactions. It's not just a one-sided thing. So our next slide, point 5. We're almost done. You guys are hanging in. Good job. Know what you want and ask for it. So understanding your motivations at work and in your career are so important, because it gives you like the most invaluable element that is so important to kind of keeping yourself sane at work, and that's perspective. Now, there are a few ways and exercises to help kind of facilitate asking yourself the question of what you want. Some are faster and a lot cheaper than others. I talk about a few in the book. But for me, the best example I have of this is when I went on a mindfulness course at work when I was at Google, and the person running the session had the audacity to ask, if we were to write our obituary that day, would we be happy with what it says? Which is quite morbid and quite upsetting, but it does make you think. And then after they asked us that, they said, okay, you're going to write in a journal for 2 minutes straight, no stopping to kind of reread things or overthink things, and to ask yourself, what do you want in 5 years' time? Which is quite a kind of traditional, kind of overdone interview question, but actually it can be quite powerful when you ask yourself that. So when I did that, I was 32 at the time, and having to write about what, Cate at 37 would look like and feel like, and what does she want, was quite overwhelming. But ultimately the things that I wrote down changed the course of my life. And that was made even more intense by somebody at the back of the room being like, oh, hey, yeah. So I just realized like the things that I want in 5 years, like if I really want those, I need to be working on them like from yesterday. I need to start working on them immediately. And I wanted to punch that person in the face because he was absolutely correct. And I was like, okay, like, what am I doing? So yeah, you are essentially kind of giving yourself an existential crisis. But getting to like the root of what you want for yourself and out of your life really, really matters. And knowing like how your job and your career play into that or don't play into that are crucial for giving you that perspective when you are at work or, trying to make money. What that looks like for you will look so different than it does from other people. And you may kind of do that exercise and find, actually work for me is just a way of like paying my bills to fund travel so that I can see the world, because that's what I want most out of my life. Or it could be that you want to retrain as a child therapist, and then you need to kind of make some immediate decisions about like, okay, what does that look like for my finances? If I need to retrain, if I need a different degree, there's a lot of things that can then kind of happen from those big questions being answered. So whatever you kind of figure out that you want for yourself, it can serve as like an anchor in stormy seas, especially when you're stressed at work. So when I say, making sure that you ask for it, this is about having difficult conversations and speaking up for yourself and communicating those needs and putting those out into the world, so that change can actually happen. Those plans and what you want for yourself, it doesn't do anyone any good if it's just in a notebook or living silently in your head while you suffer away doing some shit that you don't care about at work, right? So now that I've given you like an existential crisis, those are essentially my 5 points on how you can work without losing your mind. There they are again, in case you forgot, or you're so panicked now that they've fallen out of your brain. But yeah, do we have questions? Has anyone dared to? Was the lure of the book enough?
Well, we've got a couple of nice comments in, but I guess I have a couple of questions for you myself, Cate. What's in your career? I mean, looking back over things, which piece of advice do you wish you'd given to an earlier, out of the 5 that you see on the screen, which one would you have given to an earlier version of yourself? I know hindsight's a bitch, but
yeah, I think the perspective piece. I think my identity used to be so wrapped up in my job. Writing bios, like for your Twitter bio or LinkedIn bio or anything, was always just like, oh my God, because beyond, I am this job role, I am this job title. I really struggled to be able to like describe myself and who I am and what I want and who am I outside of, being the managing editor for BuzzFeed. And that's been the single most important thing for myself has been having that perspective, and doing that exercise of knowing what I wanted in 5 years' time and working towards those. And I turned 38 now in a couple of weeks. And now I'm having a different crisis of, well, I did all the stuff that I wanted to in that exercise. So what's next for me? So I think I'm now working on a 2-year plan, because with a small child, that seems a bit more feasible. But yeah, having that perspective for myself now of like, why am I doing this? When I start to get really stressed, like, okay, well, I hate saying find your why, but knowing why I'm doing something and being able to take that step back and not have my own identity and my sense of like myself so wrapped up in another company that I ultimately don't have that much control over, really, has been really, really beneficial and has helped me work without losing my mind.
Another self-plug in there. We got a son as well, which is always great. This is obviously, a very brief summary of some of the points you cover in this book, but I loved reading this because it is such a down-to-earth, very honest, very vulnerable sort of reflection of what it means to work. So, and you can get your hands on a copy if you ask a good question. So let's have a look at some of the questions that have come through. There's a lot of compliments coming through.
Oh, that's nice. We can also give away books for that.
Yeah, please can you be my boss?
Sure, Emma. Yes.
Emma. Big fan of your book. Thanks for sharing the session, Jenny. But here's a good one. Also from Emma. Would you work for another tech company again? I've got a perspective on that.
Yeah, do you know what? When I both with working at Microsoft and Google, I really wanted to stay there. I enjoyed working for like the company as it was, but especially with MSN, they just, were like, we don't need to write original content. Why would we have people to do that? Goodbye. And, with Google, I tried to stay. I tried to move teams, and it was just, I did such like a niche thing there that there weren't enough like content jobs in the UK that I would have been suited for. So I kind of had to go essentially. But yeah, I would. I think there's a lot of benefits. I mean, literally a lot of benefits for working at a big tech company. Yeah, so I don't really have anything against, certain sectors or, I mean, I have like my own values, and I need to make sure that those are kind of reflected enough in the capitalist society that we live in. And, which company I work for. But yeah, I would work for a tech company again.
Well, I hear TikTok are hiring, so.
Oh, they'd be like, you're old,
This is a really good question. This is one we get asked a lot in our programs at Cate as well, because a lot around sort of, spotting signs of burnout and others. And when you see someone maybe is not okay, I think a lot of managers have a tendency to bury their head or like just turn a blind eye to it. What tips would you give to support someone?
I think, first and foremost, doing like a proper check-in, and like, obviously we should be checking in with our team all the time, but that can get so focused on tasks and goals and follow-ups and this thing and that thing that you can kind of sometimes lose the kind of personal, like, how are you? So if you think that someone on your team is stressed, absolutely, as soon as possible, I think, having like a proper, like, hey, like, are you all right? Because I know that this has been a lot, and I can see that, it could be that things have been missed or whatever, but it's been like, are you okay? What? And hopefully, like, they're happy to open up. And if they're not, because sometimes people aren't, sometimes they don't want to go, yeah, actually you're pissing me off, and this situation isn't great, and this bit of work is really stressing me out. Sometimes people can be quite closed off. So I think even if they don't spill their guts to you or want to talk about it, you can just say, look, it's okay if you don't want to talk about it. I feel like I'm picking up on some signals that you might be feeling quite stressed, but you please tell me what you need. Have a think about it. You don't have to talk about it right now. And sometimes it can be that people need a bit of time off, which is okay and should be encouraged, because they're going to be so much better off if they're refreshed and have a rest. But I think, just that overall, are you okay? How can I help? How can we help support you? What's going on? Like, being there for them and listening, I think, first and foremost.
Yeah, asking questions, but also just really actively observing. We talk a lot about active listening, but often it's not what people are saying, it's their body language. You can see it in them, and it's much more difficult in a hybrid virtual world. But
you can still tell, right, when people get kind of snippy on Slack, and people aren't reading messages with the kind of most empathetic eyes. You can tell. It's harder when you're not in person, but you can still tell.
That was Gina actually that asked that question. So there we go. Thank you.
Thanks, Gina.
Any advice for a difficult conversation with your superior? Not wanting just like the performing. No name against this one.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who cried in front of my boss last week, I think really just being, I always think, like, I have tied myself up in knots in previous roles and in different jobs with, like, oh, how do I talk to them about this? Because I get really in my head, especially when I have to, like, manage up sometimes. But I think honestly, it's just about being honest. And it's about, okay, what do I need to say to them? What do I want from this conversation? What's the kind of solution, best case scenario? Just being as honest as you can. And again, coming into that room or a virtual room with a sense of empathy and kindness that you would hope that they would give to you. And, I've asked my boss, like, are you all right? Because I know this is a lot. And, how can I help? I think always asking, how can I help, and showing that you understand that they're getting pressure from above too is really important. I think it says here, not wanting to seem like you're underperforming. I'm guessing that might be if you're feeling stressed and you need to kind of communicate that to them. Something that I had to do myself. And I think for me, what I did was like, okay, what do I need from this conversation with them? Okay, I need their help prioritizing. And I also need them to be aware of all of the stuff that I'm doing that they may not see. So that when they ask me a question or they want a number done really quickly and I can't provide that, it's not because I'm slacking, it's because I have all this other stuff. So making sure that they kind of get a full picture, and that you need help from them to know what is most urgent for them sometimes can be really helpful too. So I hope that's kind of what you meant, and that was useful.
Very, very good advice. What do you do in your downtime to relax? Between your toddler and being editor-in-chief of HuffPost and
Hiding.
writing a book.
No, I mean, this is something I definitely need to get better at. But I love going for walks and listening to podcasts. My favorite podcast is Armchair Expert, which is hosted by Dax Shepard, an American actor. I don't know if people, I think there's people in the UK who are familiar with that, but that's my favorite thing. I like to read. I'm meant to have been learning the guitar, and I'm not very good, and then I get really frustrated that I'm not very good, even though I'm practicing so inconsistently. So very high expectation. I'm like, why am I not amazing at this, even though I barely do it like once a month? But yeah, I need to figure out how to do more of this.
Me and my Spanish. Are there particular parts of themselves you think tend to be particularly problematic when people bring them to work? So classic, so religion
and politics. I think, and I write, there's like a whole chapter on this, I believe, in the book, about like how to deal with your own mental health stuff at work, and how to do that authentically, but still like contained. I've worked in places where everyone is quite open about like their mental health struggles, but it's like too open, and everything is just kind of like oozing around the office, and everyone, like, it's too open, it's too much. So I always say, like, trying to keep that stuff contained, but authentic and honest as you can in a professional working environment, or particularly if you're working in a kind of spiky working environment where things aren't necessarily perhaps as soft and empathetic as they could be. I think it's when people are just like unboundaried and overshare and are all in each other's business and that sort of thing. I think that's what really kind of fuels like a toxic working environment. So I think, yeah, I think your own mental health is a tricky one, because you don't want to hide it. I don't want to hide, like, I'm very open with my team. Like, I mean, awkwardly, if you write a book about this stuff, they kind of know. But I try to be, like, I tell them, like, I can't meet at 9 a.m. on Friday because, I will have just finished therapy. So we can meet at 9:30. It's a hard one. And I think it's a continued conversation. We're all about like mental health awareness now. And it's like, well, we know, but what is, like, in practice, what does this look like for folks? Because it's not just a one and done kind of thing, right? You don't just have a hard time one time and that's it. So I don't know. I went off on a tangent there. I hope that answered your question, Izzy.
I think that's good. How to set boundaries, how to step away from being the go-to person for everything.
Oh yeah.
Boundaries is a big topic.
that is really hard. I think being the go-to for all the issues in the business, like getting as much of that information out of your head and documented is a really practical thing. If you're the only one that knows like this tricky thing with the CMS or whatever it is that people are coming to you, get that stuff out of your head. Especially, I think, if you've been at a place for a long time or it's your business, like, ask yourself, like, why am I the go-to person for all of this stuff? Is there someone else that I can delegate to? Is there stuff that I can get out of my head and put down? Do we need to kind of discuss like different workflows, that sort of thing? And then setting the boundaries to get more time for your own goals. I mean, really delegating, you need space to be able to kind of like just having time to think. It's actually really important, particularly if you're in a leadership position. So I think, I mean, I'm dealing with a lot of this stuff right now. So a lot of it is like, okay, why am I the bottleneck for so many things? Like, what can I delegate? What can I ask someone else to do, but make sure I give them enough information. And so I set them up for success. What do I need to push back on? Prioritizing stuff. Like last week when I went crying to my manager, like, oh, I have too much stuff, it was like, okay, help me prioritize. Okay, what are the things that you most need from me? These two things. Okay, so now I know this week I'm focusing on these two big things. I'm asking my team to help pick up other things. I'm, having an active to-do list that's prioritized so that I can just like get stuff off my desk and out of my head. Like, it takes a lot of work to create space for yourself, but it's really important, and you have to, otherwise you're just going to be, the go-to person for everything forever and ever. And then you'll just pass out.
I love this idea of time to think as well. I mean, anyone seen the Bill Gates documentary on Netflix? will know that he takes a week out every year to sit in a cabin on the beach with some Diet Coke and just think. And I, every time I'm talking to leaders about like create space for reflection, the end of each week, just take half an hour to like recap the week. What did you achieve? Like what, I'm like, if Bill Gates can take a week out, anyone can manage that. So
yeah. And it's like with that, it's like privilege, money, he can, fuck off to his cabin. I think even just like for us normal people, it's like, okay, how can I get 15 minutes? How can I get 15 minutes? Do I need to go for a walk and listen to white noise on your headphones or whatever, get it. Yeah. We have to get creative as little people with how we can get time and space.
Often we end up in the space of what we should want based on career paths, compartmental areas of our lives. Any tips around this? Really good question from Louise.
Yeah. I mean, that reminds me that Emma Gannon has a book coming out called The Success Myth. I think I just got a copy delivered today. So I would encourage you to read that, and as well as my book, of course. But I think it's nice to know what we should want. Career paths, again, there's another really great book called The Squiggly Career, which is fantastic because I think these very kind of rigid ideas of what a career path should look like and what we should be doing. It's hard not to get caught up in that, but I think so much of it is just knowing in your bones what's for you and what isn't. And what, knowing, okay, this is what I want for myself, and kind of looking at the bigger picture of like, okay, how does this job feed into that? Is what I'm doing right now, earning X amount of money, is that in service of my ultimate goal? Then that's fine. So I think, kind of reframing like how you spend your time and energy, and if it's in service of what you ultimately want versus what somebody else wants or someone else says you should be doing. You have to get really comfortable with what it is that you want and who you're saying yes to, and who's kind of living rent free in your head that you've created as like an authority figure of like, this is what I should be doing. Like, who's actually saying that to you? Yeah. Sometimes it's just us.
Don't always listen to that voice inside your head.
No.
Kate, thank you so much. We just got through all the questions and we are right on time. And thank you to everyone who asked a question. We will get those books out to you. Fantastic session. If you're interested in working more with Kate or any of our other amazing speakers, please get in touch. We'll, of course, share around this recording afterwards so you can share it with your peers and your colleagues as well. Just a huge thank you again, not only for joining us today, but for writing such a fantastic, accessible, and down-to-earth book full of great advice. So thank you, Kate. And
thank you.
I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their days. We'll see you next time.
Bye.